It was Veterans Day morning when the alarm bells started screaming through Sunset Manor Nursing Home. 90 elderly residents, most of them former soldiers, were trapped as smoke filled the hallways. The staff panicked, the evacuation plan failed, and death was minutes away. That's when 68-year-old Kate O'Sullivan dropped her mop and became Captain Catherine O'Sullivan again, the woman who'd saved 200 men on the beaches of Normandy. Welcome to the Untold Stories. Before we begin this incredible story of hidden courage and forgotten heroes, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe that the greatest heroes are often the ones we overlook, hit that subscribe button. Sometimes the most powerful leaders are the ones quietly serving in the background, waiting for the moment when their experience matters most. Catherine O'Sullivan had been invisible for 15 years. Every morning at 6 a.m., she arrived at Sunset Manor Nursing Home in Riverside, Vermont, wearing the same pink scrubs and carrying the same worn cleaning supplies. At 68, she moved with the careful pace of someone who'd learned to conserve energy, her silver hair always pulled back in a practical bun. The residents saw her as the gentle cleaning lady, who remembered their names and brought them extra blankets. The staff treated Kate with the polite dismissiveness reserved for aging service workers. Jennifer Martinez, the head nurse at 28, spoke to Kate in the slow, loud voice people use with the elderly. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, could you please clean room 204 again? Mr. Henderson spilled his juice." Kate would nod quietly and fetch her supplies, never mentioning that she'd once commanded a field hospital with more beds than this entire facility. Veterans Day had always been difficult for Kate. While the residents received visitors and flowers, sharing stories of their service in Korea and Vietnam, Kate quietly went about her duties. She'd listen to their tales of courage and brotherhood, occasionally nodding with understanding that seemed deeper than polite interest. But she never spoke of her own service, never mentioned that she'd landed at Normandy just 3 days after D-Day, when the beaches were still crimson. That morning, the nursing home was decorated with small American flags and patriotic banners. The activities director had planned a special ceremony to honor the 23 veterans among the residents. Kate had volunteered to help set up, arranging chairs and preparing the refreshments while the staff bustled around importantly. She moved through the preparations with quiet efficiency, her movements betraying a precision that came from decades of organizing under pressure. As Kate was mopping the main hallway, she heard George Wilson telling his grandson about the Pacific Theater. "We had brave nurses over there," the 89-year-old Marine was saying. "They saved more lives than any of us soldiers. Some of them came right onto the beaches with us." Kate paused in her mopping, a distant look crossing her face. George caught her eye and smiled. "You know about that, don't you, Kate?" She just nodded and continued working. At 10:43 a.m., Kate was in the supply closet organizing cleaning chemicals when she smelled something that didn't belong. Smoke. Not the stale cigarette smoke that sometimes drifted in from the parking lot, but the sharp, acrid smell of electrical fire. Her 68-year-old reflexes, honed by decades of emergency response, kicked in immediately. She dropped her supplies and moved toward the source, following protocols she'd learned in a very different time and place. The fire had started in the kitchen, where an overloaded electrical outlet had sparked and ignited the surrounding cabinetry. By the time Kate reached the area, flames were climbing the walls and smoke was beginning to pour into the main corridor. The kitchen staff was backing away in panic, and she could hear Jennifer calling 911 from the nurse's station. But Kate knew that help would take too long. 90 residents needed immediate evacuation, and half of them couldn't walk. The fire alarm was deafening, and confused residents were beginning to emerge from their rooms. Some were in wheelchairs, others used walkers, and many were showing signs of panic and disorientation. Jennifer and 2 other nurses were trying to maintain order, but they were overwhelmed. The facility's emergency plan was falling apart in real time. And Kate could see that precious minutes were being wasted on procedure while the fire spread behind them. That's when something shifted in Catherine O'Sullivan. The humble cleaning lady disappeared, replaced by the woman who'd once managed chaos under German artillery fire. She stepped into the center of the corridor and raised her voice with an authority that cut through the panic. Listen to me. Everyone stay calm. We're going to evacuate in organized groups, and everyone is going to make it out safely. The transformation was so sudden that Jennifer actually stopped talking. Jennifer, take 3 staff members and start with the bedridden patients in the East Wing, Kate commanded, her voice carrying the kind of absolute authority that made people obey without question. Use the wheelchairs as stretchers if you have to. George, you and the mobile residents form a line at the main exit and help others as they come through. Mrs. Peterson, you coordinate with the arriving fire department. Her military bearing was unmistakable now. Varsailin. For a moment, nobody moved. Then George Wilson, the old Marine, snapped to attention. He'd heard that tone before, from officers who knew what they were doing under fire. Yes, ma'am, he said, and suddenly everyone was moving. Kate had divided 90 people into manageable groups, assigned clear responsibilities, and established a command structure in less than 60 seconds. Jennifer stared at her in amazement before rushing to follow orders. Kate moved through the building with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd managed field hospitals under enemy fire. She triaged the evacuees just as she'd once triaged wounded soldiers, identifying who needed immediate assistance and who could wait. Her hands, weathered by years of cleaning floors, displayed the steady competence of someone who'd sutured wounds while shells exploded overhead. The smoke was getting thicker, but Kate remained calm. Mrs. O'Sullivan, Jennifer called out as she helped wheel an elderly woman toward the exit. How do you know how to do this? Kate glanced at her while helping a confused resident to his feet. Same way you learned nursing, dear. Training and experience. But there was something in her tone that suggested her training had been acquired under very different circumstances than any civilian nursing program. Her movements were too precise, too automatic. As the evacuation continued, Kate coordinated with the arriving firefighters with the same efficiency she'd once used to brief military doctors. 90 residents total, 16 bedridden, 12 with mobility issues. Rest are ambulatory. All East Wing clear, working on West Wing now. No casualties yet. Fire Chief Rodriguez looked at her with the respect one professional gives another. Ma'am, have you done this before? Kate's smile was slight but knowing. The last group of residents was being evacuated when Kate noticed that Mrs. Chun, an 86-year-old woman with dementia, was missing from the count. Without hesitation, Kate headed back into the building, now thick with smoke. Jennifer tried to stop her. Mrs. O'Sullivan, you can't go back in there. But Kate was already moving with the determined stride of someone who'd once run toward danger while others ran away. Varsail and Kate found Mrs. Chun hiding under her bed, confused and terrified by the noise and smoke. Come on, sweetheart, Kate said gently, coaxing the frightened woman out. We're going on a little trip outside. She helped Mrs. Chun to her feet and guided her through the smoke-filled hallway with the same calm assurance she'd once used to comfort wounded soldiers. Her years of caring for the elderly had prepared her for this moment in ways she'd never expected. As they emerged from the building, the crowd of evacuees broke into spontaneous applause. Kate guided Mrs. Chun to the medical station that had been set up in the parking lot, then quietly stepped back to watch the professionals take over. The building was fully engulfed now, but every single resident had been accounted for. 0 casualties, 0 injuries. It was the kind of perfect evacuation that only happens when someone with real experience takes charge. Fire Chief Rodriguez approached Kate as the scene was being secured. Ma'am, I need to ask again. What's your background? That was textbook emergency management. Kate looked at the burning building, then at the residents being comforted by their families. I was a nurse, she said simply. a long time ago. But Rodriguez wasn't satisfied. There was something about her composure, her command presence, that suggested much more than civilian nursing experience. George Wilson had been watching Kate throughout the evacuation, and something about her bearing had triggered memories from his own military service. As the crowd began to disperse, he wheeled his chair over to where she stood. "You weren't just a nurse, were you?" he asked quietly. Kate looked at the old Marine, seeing recognition in his eyes. "No," she said finally. "I wasn't just a nurse." The weight of decades of silence hung in the air between them. "I was Captain Catherine O'Sullivan," Kate said, so quietly that only George could hear. "Army Nurse Corps, 8th Field Hospital. I landed at Normandy on June 9, 1944, 3 days after D-Day." George's eyes widened. He'd heard stories about the nurses who'd come ashore during the invasion, setting up medical stations under fire while the battle still raged. "You were there?" "At Omaha Beach?" Kate nodded. "For 6 months. We saved over 200 soldiers in the first week alone." Jennifer had been standing nearby, listening in stunned silence. The woman she'd been treating like a simple cleaning lady for 3 years was a D-Day veteran, a commissioned officer who'd served in one of the most critical battles of World War II. "Mrs. O'Sullivan," Jennifer said, her voice filled with newfound respect, "why didn't you ever tell us?" Kate shrugged. "Nobody ever asked. And it was a long time ago. I'm just here to help take care of people." Word spread quickly among the evacuees and their families. The quiet cleaning lady who'd saved them all was a decorated World War II veteran. Margaret Hayes, whose husband had fought in the Pacific, approached Kate with tears in her eyes. "My Harold always said the nurses were the real heroes. He said they saved more lives than any general ever could." Kate accepted the praise with the same quiet dignity she'd shown while mopping floors and emptying bedpans. As the media arrived to cover the story, Kate tried to fade into the background. She'd never sought attention for her service, either during the war or in the 78 years since. But the residents and staff wouldn't let her disappear. They formed a protective circle around her, honoring not just her heroism that day, but the decades of quiet service she'd provided. "She's our hero," Jennifer told the reporters. "She always has been." Have you ever underestimated someone because of their age or job? Have you met an elderly person whose past was far more extraordinary than you ever imagined? Share your story in the comments below. The local news picked up the story, and soon national outlets were calling. But Kate declined all interviews. "I just did what needed to be done," she told the persistent reporters. "Same as I did in France, same as I've been doing here for 15 years. Versailles, the nursing home, was rebuilt 6 months later, and Kate was offered the position of Emergency Preparedness Director. She declined, preferring to return to her cleaning duties. But everything had changed. The staff treated her with the deep respect she'd always deserved, and the residents looked at her with awe. The woman who'd once commanded a field hospital under enemy fire was content to serve quietly, but her secret was finally out. George Wilson made it his mission to ensure Kate's service was properly recognized. He contacted veterans organizations and lobbied for her to receive the recognition she'd never sought. "She's part of the greatest generation," he told anyone who would listen. "She landed at Normandy and saved lives under fire. Then she came home and spent the next 78 years still saving lives, just more quietly." On Veterans Day the following year, Sunset Manor held a special ceremony honoring Captain Catherine O'Sullivan. She stood uncomfortably at attention as her commendations were read aloud. Bronze Star for Valor, Purple Heart for wounds received under enemy fire, Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism in medical operations during the D-Day invasion. The woman who'd mopped these same floors a year ago was finally receiving the honor she'd always deserved. Kate's story spread beyond the nursing home, inspiring other elderly women to share their own forgotten tales of service. Letters poured in from families of soldiers she'd treated at Normandy. From nurses who'd served in later conflicts, from young women entering military service. She'd become a symbol of the unrecognized contributions of women in wartime. Proof that heroes don't always wear the uniforms we expect them to wear. But Kate remained fundamentally unchanged. She still arrived at 6 a.m., still wore pink scrubs, still remembered every resident's name and their favorite comfort foods. The only difference was that now everyone knew what they'd always been seeing but had never recognized. A woman whose quiet strength had been forged in the crucible of history's greatest conflict, who'd spent decades serving others without asking for anything in return. Jennifer, now the director of nursing, often sought Kate's advice on crisis management and patient care. "You make it look so easy," she said one day as they walked through the facility together. Kate smiled. "When you've set up a field hospital while German artillery is falling around you, most other problems seem manageable." Her matter-of-fact tone made the incredible sound routine, which was exactly how she'd always approached extraordinary challenges. The residents began asking Kate to share her war stories during their evening gatherings. At first reluctant, she eventually opened up about her experiences. The chaos of the Normandy landing, the desperate first days when wounded soldiers arrived faster than they could be treated, the satisfaction of sending healed men back to their units. Her stories brought history to life for people who'd lived through it from different perspectives. Kate's nephew, who'd driven from Boston after hearing the news coverage, brought photo albums she hadn't looked at in decades. Pictures of her in army uniform, young and serious. Her field hospital unit posed in front of medical tents. Letters of commendation from generals whose names were now in history books. "Aunt Kate," he said, "why did you never talk about this?" She looked at the photos of her younger self and shrugged. "It was what we did." The ceremony on Veterans Day had attracted military officials from across New England. A colonel from the Army Medical Command presented Kate with a flag that had flown over the Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial. "This is for all the lives you saved, Captain," he said, "both then and now." Kate accepted the flag with the same grace she'd shown when accepting residents' thanks for bringing them extra pillows. Service to her was simply service. Local schools began inviting Kate to speak about her experiences, but she preferred when students visited the nursing home instead. She'd show them around, introducing them to other veterans and their stories. "History isn't just in books," she'd tell them. "It's sitting right here in these chairs if you take the time to listen." Her ability to make connections between past and present was a gift that came from having lived through both. The rebuilt nursing home included a memorial wall honoring all the veterans who'd lived there, with Kate's photo and commendations prominently displayed. Visitors would stop and read about the D-Day nurse, who'd become a cleaning lady, then look around to see if they could spot her still working. Most of the time, they could. She'd be in the corner somewhere, quietly taking care of the people who needed her most. A year after the fire, Kate was interviewed by a local historian documenting women's contributions to World War II. "What do you want people to remember about your generation?" he asked. Kate thought for a moment. "That we did what needed to be done, when it needed to be done, without asking who was watching or who would remember. The job was the reward. Everything else was just noise." Her philosophy of service had never changed. Kate O'Sullivan continued working at Sunset Manor until she was 75, finally retiring only when arthritis made the physical demands too difficult. On her last day, the residents and staff held a celebration that filled the main dining room. She'd served her country in war and her community in peace, saving lives in both endeavors. Her legacy wasn't just the 200 soldiers she'd helped heal at Normandy, but the countless elderly residents she'd cared for with dignity and compassion. Captain Catherine O'Sullivan never asked for recognition. For 78 years, she served quietly, first saving lives on the beaches of Normandy, then caring for heroes in their final years. But when crisis struck, her greatest generation training took over, proving that true leaders never retire, They just wait for the moment they're needed most. If this story moved you, subscribe to the Untold Stories. We honor the forgotten heroes walking among us. Have you ever worked alongside someone whose past was far more remarkable than you realized? Share your story in the comments and tell us what city you're watching from today. These moments of recognition matter more than we know. Remember, next time you see an elderly person working quietly in the background, you might be looking at someone who changed the course of history. Heroes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they wear pink scrubs and carry mops, waiting decades for the moment when their experience will matter again. Sometimes the greatest leaders are the ones who've learned to serve without recognition, to lead without titles, to save lives without expecting thanks. Because at the end of the day, the job is the reward, and everything else is just noise. This is the Untold Stories, where forgotten heroes finally get remembered.